The last transmission. When the alarms started screaming. Director Kelvin watched the sensor displays with growing horror as red warning lights flooded the control center of Arcturus station. The mining outpost had been peaceful for 17 cycles, extracting valuable minerals from the asteroid belt while serving as a waypoint for merchant vessels crossing the outer rim. Now everything was falling apart. The screens showed hundreds of contacts emerging from slip space, dark vessels that absorbed light rather than reflected it. They moved with purpose and terrible coordination. His communications officer, a young Three named Voss, turned with trembling antennae. The distress beacon had been activated automatically when the first hostile ships appeared, broadcasting their situation across every emergency frequency known to the Galactic Collective. But Kelvin knew the truth that made his heart sink. The nearest military outpost was 4 days away at maximum speed, and these attackers would not wait 4 days. The Void Swarm attacks. The first strike hit the Eastern Habitat module without warning. Kelvin felt the station shudder as hull plating vaporized under weapons fire that defied conventional understanding. The enemy used no plasma, no lasers, no recognizable energy signatures. Instead, their weapons seemed to unmake matter itself, leaving nothing but void where solid metal had existed moments before. Screams echoed through the communication channels as atmosphere rushed out into space, carrying workers and families into the frozen darkness. Voss worked frantically at his console, his 4 arms moving across controls with desperate speed. Director, defensive grid is responding, but our shields cannot stop their weapons. Whatever technology they possess, it simply passes through our barriers as if they were not there. The tactical display showed their 6 defense frigates attempting to form a protective screen around the station, their weapons firing continuously. But the enemy vessels numbered in the hundreds, and each one seemed capable of absorbing tremendous damage without slowing. Kelvin activated the station-wide alert system, his voice carrying to every corridor and chamber. All personnel, this is Director Kelvin. Proceed immediately to emergency shelters in the core sections. Defense forces, buy us whatever time you can. May the ancestors watch over us. He cut the transmission and looked at Voss with eyes that had seen too much death in too few minutes. How many souls are aboard the station? Voss consulted his records, though his voice shook with each word. 42,000 permanent residents, plus another 18,000 miners and merchants currently docked. Director, the evacuation ships cannot launch while under this level of attack. We would be sending them to certain death. Kelvin understood. The small transport vessels stood no chance against the swarm of enemy fighters that filled the space around Arcturus station like schools of metallic predators. Defense line crumbles. Captain Thross commanded the defense frigate Stellar Guardian, the largest warship assigned to protect this remote sector. His crew had trained for pirate raids and asteroid collisions, not warfare against an enemy that fought with technology beyond comprehension. His weapons officer reported that their plasma cannons were having minimal effect, each shot seeming to disappear into the dark hulls of the enemy vessels without causing visible damage. The other 5 frigates formed up alongside him, creating a defensive formation that military doctrine had refined over centuries. But doctrine assumed enemies that followed the same physical laws, that could be hurt by conventional weapons, that valued their own survival enough to retreat when damaged. The Void Swarm demonstrated none of these characteristics. They advanced in perfect silence, no communications detected, no demands issued, simply moving forward with mechanical inevitability. One by one, the defense frigates died. The Swift Talon exploded when enemy fire penetrated its reactor core, taking its crew of 300 with it. The Morning Star lasted longer, its captain attempting a ramming maneuver when weapons proved useless, but the enemy vessels simply scattered and reformed, leaving the frigate to drift powerlessly with its engines destroyed. Captain Thross watched his tactical display turn from organized defense to chaotic survival as each ship fought alone against overwhelming numbers. His own vessel shook as multiple impacts struck the forward sections. Hull breaches on decks 4 through 7, his damage control officer reported. Life support failing in the port quarter. Captain, we cannot sustain this. We must fall back. But fall back to where? Behind them lay Arcturus Station with 60,000 civilians depending on the military to buy them time to evacuate or hide. Thras had taken an oath when he accepted command, swearing to protect the innocent even at cost of his own life. The desperate message. Back on the station, Director Kelvin watched the last defense frigate go dark on his sensors. The Stellar Guardian had fought valiantly, destroying at least 30 enemy vessels before being overwhelmed. But for every enemy ship destroyed, 10 more seemed to take its place. The Void Swarm was living up to the terrifying reports from other sectors, an enemy that appeared suddenly, destroyed everything in its path, then vanished back into the darkness of deep space. Voss looked up from his communications console with an expression of desperate hope. Director, I have configured the emergency transmitter to broadcast on every known frequency, including the restricted channels. If we boost the signal to maximum power, we might reach vessels in adjacent sectors. Kelvin knew what his officer was suggesting. The restricted channels were forbidden because they reached into the quarantine zones, the regions of space where dangerous species were isolated for the safety of the Galactic Collective. The Council of Worlds had designated certain planets as forbidden zones after surveys revealed native species too aggressive, too unpredictable, too dangerous to integrate into galactic society. Chief among these was a small blue world in Sector 7, home to a species that had achieved spaceflight despite existing in conditions that would kill most civilized beings. The Galactic Collective had chosen to leave them isolated, hoping that by the time they developed interstellar travel, they might have evolved past their violent nature. Kelvin made his decision. Send the transmission on all frequencies, including the restricted channels. If there is any chance that someone, anyone, might hear us and respond in time, we must take it. Voss nodded and began configuring the transmission array. Kelvin composed his message carefully, knowing these might be the last words heard from Arcturus Station. He spoke into the recorder, fighting to keep his voice steady despite the explosions shaking the control center. This is Director Kelvin of Arcturus Station in the Outer Rim territories. We are under attack by hostile forces identified as the Void Swarm. Our defensive fleet has been destroyed. 60,000 civilians are trapped aboard this station with no possibility of evacuation. Enemy forces are breaching our hull sections. We estimate less than 1 hour before complete station failure. The words felt inadequate to describe the horror unfolding around him, but Kelvin continued. To any vessels receiving this transmission, we beg for assistance. Our weapons cannot harm the enemy. Our shields cannot stop them. If anyone possesses the capability to engage these forces, please respond. Coordinates are attached to this message. Arcturus Station out. He nodded to Voss, who activated the transmission. The message began broadcasting at maximum power, repeating every 30 seconds, reaching out across light years of space in all directions. Kelvin sat back in his chair and watched the tactical display as enemy vessels moved closer to the station's core. Medical reports showed the shelters were overflowing with wounded, and the doctors were running out of supplies. Engineers reported that the main reactor was destabilizing from combat damage, and they had perhaps 2 hours before a catastrophic failure would destroy what the enemy had not. A presence in the darkness. 20 minutes passed with no response to the distress call. The enemy had breached the outer commercial districts and were moving through the station with terrible efficiency. Reports described creatures that moved through corridors in perfect coordination, ignoring wounded defenders to target structural weak points and critical systems. They sought not conquest but total destruction. Voss suddenly straightened at his console, his antennae quivering with confusion. Director, I am detecting an unusual spatial anomaly forming in grid sector 92. The energy readings do not match any known jump drive signature. Kelvin pulled up the sensor data and felt a chill run through him. Something was tearing a hole in space itself, and the energy levels involved dwarfed anything the Galactic Collective possessed. The anomaly expanded rapidly, space folding in ways that hurt to observe, and then something emerged. Kelvin's screens filled with the image of a warship unlike anything in the known databases. It was angular where collective vessels were curved, covered in weapons were collective ships valued efficiency, and radiating power signatures that made the sensors scream warnings. Behind the first ship came 5 more, each one moving with precision that spoke of military discipline and extensive training. Voss worked frantically to analyze the newcomers. "Director, those vessels are accelerating at 14 standard gravities. Their hull composition includes materials I cannot identify. Weapon systems appear to include chemical propulsion rockets, electromagnetic accelerators, and directed energy platforms. Whoever these are, they are not part of the collective, and they are headed directly into the combat zone." Kelvin transmitted toward the unknown vessels, hoping they could understand standard collective language. "Unknown ships, this is Arcturus Station. You have entered an active war zone. The Void Swarm will destroy you. Please maintain safe distance." The response came back in slightly accented but clear collective standard, a male voice that carried absolute confidence despite facing an enemy that had just annihilated an entire defense fleet. "Arcturus Station, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Earth Defense Fleet. We received your distress call and are moving to engage hostile forces. All station personnel should remain in shelters. We will handle the situation." Kelvin felt hope and terror warring in his chest. Earth. The forbidden death world. The planet of aggressive predators and impossible survivors. And they had just jumped 6 warships into a battle against an enemy that could not be stopped. Earth answers the call. The Admiral's decision. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the command bridge of the EDS Defiant, studying the tactical display with eyes that had seen combat in the worst environments humanity had ever faced. She had commanded vessels during the Mars Rebellion, fought pirates in the Kuiper Belt, and led rescue operations through asteroid storms that destroyed entire colonies. But this was different. This was humanity's first official contact with the galactic community, and they were making their entrance in the middle of a massacre. Her executive officer, Commander James Park, moved to stand beside her chair. "Admiral, long-range sensors confirm the station is severely damaged. Enemy vessels number approximately 400, spread across a 3-dimensional combat sphere surrounding the target. Their weapons technology is unlike anything in our databases." Chen nodded slowly, her mind already running through tactical scenarios and probability calculations. The crew of the Defiant worked with quiet efficiency around her, men and women who represented the best Earth had to offer. They came from every nation and culture, united by humanity's drive to explore and protect. When the distress call had reached their patrol route near the edge of human-explored space, Chen had not hesitated. The message spoke of children dying, of civilians trapped with no hope of rescue, and that was enough. Earth had spent 2 decades building its space fleet in secret after detecting transmissions from the Galactic Collective. Humanity had chosen to remain hidden, observing and learning, understanding that revealing themselves too soon might invite conquest or forced assimilation. But all the strategic planning in the world meant nothing when Chen heard that distress call. Some things transcended politics and caution. Some things demanded action regardless of consequences. First Strike Protocol. Captain Marcus Webb commanded the heavy cruiser EDS Valkyrie, positioned on the Defiant's starboard flank as the human fleet accelerated toward the combat zone at speeds that would have killed any unprotected crew. The inertial dampening systems that Earth engineers had developed through decades of trial and error kept the acceleration forces manageable, but even with dampening, Webb felt the pressure as the ship pushed 14 gravities. His weapons officer, Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, reported readiness across all systems. "Captain, railgun batteries are charged and tracking multiple targets. Missile tubes loaded with Shrike interceptors and Hammer ship killers. Point defense lasers online. We are weapons free and awaiting your command." Webb studied the tactical feed coming from the Defiant, analyzing enemy movement patterns and identifying priority targets. The Void Swarm vessels moved in coordinated groups, suggesting either hive intelligence or extremely sophisticated communication networks. Their formation showed tactical awareness, protecting larger vessels with screens of smaller craft. But they also showed a pattern that Webb recognized from his studies of animal behavior on Earth. They surrounded prey and closed in from all sides, expecting no resistance capable of threatening them. That expectation was about to be shattered. Webb activated the fleet channel, his voice calm despite the adrenaline surging through his system. All vessels, this is Webb. Execute Combat Protocol Delta on the Admiral's mark. Target priority goes to vessels closest to the station. We need to create a safe zone around those civilians before the enemy can breach the core sections. Acknowledgements came back from the other 5 ships, each captain confirming readiness. The mathematics of war. Admiral Chen watched the range counter tick down as the human fleet closed the distance. The enemy had noticed their arrival and was redirecting approximately 100 vessels to intercept while the remainder continued assaulting the station. Chen appreciated the tactical logic. Divide your forces to eliminate the new threat while maintaining pressure on the primary objective. It was sound strategy against conventional opponents. But humanity had not become the dominant species on a death world by being conventional. Earth had taught its children hard lessons about survival, about adaptability, about finding advantages where none seemed to exist. And those lessons had been refined through centuries of warfare between human nations, each conflict driving innovation in weapons and tactics. Chen activated her command channel. All ships, weapons free. Target enemy vessels threatening the station. Fire at will. The Defiant shuddered as its railgun batteries opened fire, magnetic accelerators launching tungsten penetrators at velocities approaching 2% of light speed. Behind the railgun rounds came missiles, hundreds of them, each one guided by AI systems that could track and adapt to enemy countermeasures. The human fleet had spread into a three-dimensional formation that maximized firing lanes while maintaining mutual support. Each ship could bring its weapons to bear on multiple targets while staying within range of supporting vessels. It was a formation developed through decades of war games and combat simulations, refined until it represented the optimal balance of offense and defense. Impact. The first railgun rounds reached their targets in seconds, traveling too fast for the enemy to evade or intercept. Tungsten penetrators designed to punch through asteroid mining equipment and reinforced battle armor struck void swarm vessels with kinetic energy measured in megatons. The result was catastrophic. Enemy ships that had absorbed plasma fire and energy weapons without visible damage shattered under the impact of simple mass traveling at relativistic velocities. Lieutenant Martinez watched her tactical display with fierce satisfaction as targeting solutions resolved and weapon systems tracked and fired with computer precision. Captain, direct hits confirmed on primary targets. Enemy vessels showing critical damage. Their hulls cannot withstand kinetic impact at these velocities. Webb allowed himself a tight smile. The Void Swarm had likely never faced opponents who used primitive kinetic weapons, relying instead on exotic energy platforms that their strange technology could absorb or deflect. But there was nothing exotic about a chunk of dense metal traveling fast enough to release its mass energy in explosive force. Physics was physics, regardless of what technological advances a species achieved. And humanity had learned long ago that sometimes the simplest solutions were the most effective. The missile barrage arrived next, smart weapons that adjusted their approach vectors based on enemy movements and prioritized targets according to threat assessment algorithms. The Shrike interceptors went after enemy fighter craft, filling space with shrapnel that shredded the smaller vessels. The Hammer ship killers targeted capital ships, their warheads designed to penetrate hulls and detonate inside enemy vessels. Explosions blossomed across the combat zone as human weapons found their marks. The Void Swarm formation broke as vessels attempted to evade or retaliate, their perfect coordination disrupted by the sudden and devastating assault. Humanity reveals itself. On Arcturus Station, Director Kelvin watched in amazement as the human fleet tore through enemy forces that had seemed invincible. The strange angular warships moved with brutal efficiency, their weapons firing in coordinated volleys that left enemy vessels destroyed or crippled. Voss could barely speak as he monitored the battle. Director, those ships are using kinetic weapons. Simple mass drivers and chemical explosives. But the velocity and precision are beyond anything in collective records. Kelvin understood what he was witnessing. The Galactic Collective had developed energy weapons because they were efficient and clean, requiring no ammunition storage and generating less recoil. But they had forgotten that kinetic energy, properly applied, could overcome almost any defense. These humans had apparently never forgotten that fundamental principle of physics. The enemy was adapting now, redirecting more vessels to engage the human fleet. But adaptation required time, and the humans were not giving them time. The Earth warships continued their assault without pause, railguns firing continuously while missile tubes reloaded and launched new salvos. Point defense lasers created a protective screen that intercepted incoming fire, and the few enemy weapons that penetrated were absorbed by armor plating that showed battle damage but held firm. Admiral Chen ordered the fleet to advance, pushing deeper into the combat zone and positioning themselves between the station and the remaining Void Swarm vessels. The message was clear. To reach the civilians, the enemy would have to go through Earth's defenders. And going through Earth's defenders was proving to be impossible. The human ships fought with a ferocity that matched their reputation as Death Worlders, but also with a discipline and coordination that spoke of professionalism and training. The tide turns. Captain Webb brought the Valkyrie through a turning maneuver that would have torn apart a collective vessel, rolling his ship to bring fresh weapon batteries to bear on enemy positions. His crew worked with practiced efficiency, damage control teams sealing hull breaches while weapons crews maintained firing rates that exceeded design specifications. Lieutenant Martinez reported ammunition expenditure rates and adjusted targeting to conserve the finite supply of physical munitions. The enemy was retreating now, those vessels that remained combat-capable withdrawing toward the edges of the combat zone. They had come expecting easy prey and found instead opponents who fought with terrible effectiveness. The Void Swarm had lost more than half their forces in less than 30 minutes of engagement, casualties that dwarfed anything they had experienced from collective military forces. Admiral Chen watched the tactical display as enemy vessels began jumping away, fleeing back into the darkness of unexplored space. She did not pursue. Her mission was not to chase down a fleeing enemy but to protect the station and its civilians. All ships, cease fire and form defensive perimeter around Arcturus Station. Medical teams prepare for rescue and relief operations. Let us show these people that humanity came to help, not to conquer. The human fleet moved into position, 6 warships forming a protective shell around the damaged station. On board the Defiant, communications officers began broadcasting in collective standard, offering medical assistance and engineering support. Admiral Chen prepared to make formal contact with the galactic community, knowing that this moment would define humanity's place among the stars. On Arcturus Station, Director Kelvin received the transmission from Admiral Chen and felt hope burning in his chest for the first time since the attack began. The Death Worlders had come when no one else could, and they had driven back an enemy that seemed unstoppable. Perhaps, he thought, the galaxy had misjudged Earth. Perhaps these dangerous humans were exactly the allies the collective needed.